Thank you, Ms. Newberger and Mr. Bayraktari. Ladies and gentlemen, we are honored to welcome Keith Krach, Chairman of the Krach Institute for Tech Diplomacy at Purdue University, to deliver a keynote address.
Well, how's everybody doing? Has it been a great conference? Good, yeah. All right, good. Well, the reception is coming pretty soon. It's really a great honor to be with all you folks. The reality we face as a nation is one of ever-increasing cyber warfare and aggressive techno-economic competition. And I think we all know our rivals are playing the long game, and they're playing for keeps, a game of four-dimensional economic, military, diplomatic, and cultural chess. And technology is at its crossroads. And within that crossroads, the bullseye is AI. And I can tell you, they're playing this game with little respect for rule of law, property of all kinds, human rights, sovereignty of nations, the press. And there is nothing static about a superpower advantage. It can be taken away in an instant. And in order to prevail, we have to play the game better. We have to up our game. And there's nothing less at stake than freedom versus authoritarianism. And I think the world is waking up to that. So at the Krach Institute for Tech Diplomacy, our North Star is technology must advance freedom. And the mission is the same as President Trump, to make the United States the AI capital of the world. So what's the key to winning? What's the big differentiator? Is it technology? It's not. It's one word: trust. And trust is the most important word in any language. It's the basis of every relationship, business, personal, or otherwise. You do business with people you trust, buy from people you trust, you partner with people you trust, you love people you trust. So one of the things that we did when I was Under Secretary of State, I was charged with the mission of developing and operationalizing our global economic security strategy to drive economic growth, maximize national security, and combat China's economic aggression. And the trust doctrine is what we use, and it stands out against authoritarian's doctrine of what we call the domination doctrine: coercion, co-option, intimidation, retaliation. The trust doctrine, well, those principles are what we call democratic values: fairness, reciprocity, integrity, accountability, respect for rule of law, respect for human rights, respect for sovereignty of nations. And one of our urgent missions, and I brought 12 folks in from Silicon Valley. I'm the former CEO of DocuSign, and was 5G. And if you remember back in 2020, both sides of the aisle were hitting a panic button because it looked like Huawei and China's master plan to control 5G communications around the world was unstoppable. They had just announced 91 5G deals around the world. And I think I don't have to educate you guys. 5G is not just about a cell phone. We know that it can power anything from utility grids, sanitation systems, autonomous vehicles, or your personal communications. Now, all previous U.S. efforts at that point had failed. And then we had an aha moment. So coming in from Silicon Valley, never been in government before, the first thing I did is I met with 60 of my foreign counterparts: economic ministers, finance ministers, foreign ministers, prime ministers. And inevitably, I'd be talking with them, and I'd say, how's your relationship with China? And it seemed like they said the same thing every time. they're a really important trading partner. And then they look both ways, like somebody was in a room, and they go, but we don't trust them. And that rang bells in my head, because when I ran DocuSign, I would stand up in front of our employees and our customers, and I'd say, you know what? We're not in a software business. We're in a trust business. We deal with people's most important documents. Those are the ones that you sign. And so what we did is we made trust at the core of that strategy and created a thing called the trust doctrine, because that's the biggest differentiator. You know, in Silicon Valley, we always look at strategic position. The objective of the game is to be the category king. And your strategic position. And I would talk about that with folks at the government. They go, strategic position, what is that? I said, well, that's your position versus your competitor's position. It's the value is the delta between the two. And it's got to be real. So you don't have to be perfect. You know, if you're running from the bear, you just have to be faster than a slower guy. And they said, well, why do you need that? Well, you need to deposition your competitors so you can set traps. But that was one of the keys. And so we use that trust doctrine. And in less than a year, we built a thing called the Clean Network Alliance of Democracies. And that was comprised of 60 countries representing 2/3 of the world's global GDP, 200 telcos, a host of industry-leading companies that operated by that trust doctrine, which meant they did not use untrusted technology, which was Huawei. And so those 91 deals went down to 12 deals. It was the first government-led initiative that defeated China Inc. And in the process, we exposed their biggest weakness, and that is nobody trusts them. And in one strategic jujitsu move, what we did, you know, if you look at these trust principles, these are principles that we honor in the United States and the free world. And authoritarian regimes use it against us for their competitive advantage. They take advantage of us. So in one jujitsu move, we actually weaponized the principles that protect our freedom and use it against them. And it has turned out to be a proven model. And I think that was one of the things that really got us started to continue that mission at the Krach Institute for Tech Diplomacy, because what we did is we invented a new form of tech statecraft, which is simply integrating technology expertise with Silicon Valley strategies and foreign policy tools based on the trust doctrine to advance freedom through trusted technology. Now, as a result of that and other national security initiatives that we did, I was declared an enemy of the state of China, sanctioned by China. My whole family was. And if they gave a medal for that, I'd probably sleep with it under my pillow, because I'm not going to bend a knee to Emperor Xi. A year later, that trust doctrine was nominated for the Nobel Peace Prize. And the reason why I bring this up is that if you look at what we're doing in AI, that model totally applies. And that was one of the reasons why at the Krach Institute we were asked by Congress to chair the Global Tech Security Commission, which is comprised of 15 countries and represents 12 tech sectors and all kinds of strategy specialists. There's over 50 commissioners. And it was to develop the Global Tech Security Strategy. And what I want to share with you now is some of that, applying that thinking to the AI world. So the Global Tech Security Strategy basically has 3 pillars. It's pretty simple. You know, if there's anything I learned in government is, sometimes everybody just makes things too complicated. And I think the most intellectual exercise in the world is taking something complex and making it simple. Because if you can do that, you can communicate that. If you can communicate it, you can execute on it. And in Washington, there's such a huge gap between policy and execution. And we were able to execute it at lightning speed. So the three pillars, the first one is there's offense, defense, and force multipliers. So offense is simple. It's turbocharging innovation and competitive advantage. That's the offense. Defense, safeguarding our assets. And force multipliers is really building a network of trusted partners. So if you break it down, let's look at the AI area. I'll pick 3 examples, each one. So in terms of offense, what we need to do is, turbocharge our innovation. And if we're serious about winning that AI race, we've got to supercharge that innovation engine. And that starts with 3 critical investments. The first one is in data centers and energy, because AI doesn't run on ideology. It runs on infrastructure. So we've got to make some massive investments in this country in terms of high-performance computing clusters, data centers, and energy capacity. As you know, AI requires unprecedented computing power, and we've got to ensure that the U.S. leads in AI infrastructure. The second area is investing in innovation. Semiconductors, things like Stargate Technologies. One of our missions was the semiconductor business, because in 2020, we looked around, and there was not one semiconductor company in the world that was going to invest in the United States. And I talked to all the CEOs, Intel, Samsung, Micron. But we said, if we get TSMC, the world leader, to come over and invest, then not only are they going to bring their suppliers and their ecosystem, because there's such a great clustering effect, but those other guys are going to follow too. So I just happen to know some of the folks on the board at TSMC. They made a call and said, look, we need you over here. Within 2 weeks, they made that announcement. It was the largest onshoring in United States history, and that was $12 billion. Since then, they upped that to $65 billion, and then you saw a few days ago another $100 billion, $165 billion. And by the way, right after TSMC announced, Intel came in with $20 billion in Chandler, Arizona. Samsung came in with, I think it was over $10 billion in Texas. So that TSMC, and then what that led us to, and it was interesting because I'm talking with the TSMC guys, Mark Liu. He said, there's a $4 billion differential between Taiwan and here. And they opened their books to us. And it wasn't due to cost of labor or anything like that, because it's so automated. It's because the government subsidizes it. And that's when we architected the $280 billion Chips and Science Act, because we needed that money. So if you look at the result of that, now $450 billion of investment in United States semiconductor industry and jobs as a result of that, of tipping that. And that is the leverage I think that we can do in the AI area. And one of the things we did when we proposed this bill to Congress is we said, look, for every dollar the government invests, we can get the private sector to invest 3. Well, this ended up to be probably 10 times that. And I think that's a case study of what we can do. The third key area of investment, and perhaps the most important, of course, is the workforce, human capital. And if you look at just in the semiconductor business alone, there's going to be 100,000 jobs that are required, and in the whole AI area as well. And that's one of the reasons. At Purdue, we started our semiconductor engineering program, only university in the country where you get your bachelor's, master's, and PhD on that. And that's everything, because that's where we can really, really differentiate our guys. And if you look at it, that's probably our greatest strategic asset is our people. And that's also a thing that we did at the Krach Institute for Tech Diplomacy, is we created the Tech Diplomacy Academy. So all 20 national security technologies, We do on-demand training. We're training the U.S. State Department, Commerce Department, a number of foreign ministries, Taiwan, Sweden, Japan, and now a lot of the private sector guys are taking these things. It's really to educate them. And it's interesting. You know, probably some of you are from government, some of you are from Silicon Valley, but you know, in Silicon Valley, what we learned is economic warcraft, because it is about being that category king. You know, if you're the category king, you get 80% of resources and 80% of market cap. Players 2, 3 get, you know, steak knives. And so this is stuff they don't teach at the State Department or Treasury Department or Commerce or Trade or even at DOD. But when you combine that type of, you know, I don't know, it's not really written in a book, but that economic warcraft, that is the tool of choice. So anyway, that's one of the things that we're teaching. So let's talk about the second pillar is defense. And that is safeguarding our critical assets. And, you know, one of the keys to winning the AI race means we're not allowing our adversaries to steal, infiltrate, or weaponize our technology against us. And we absolutely have to act decisively, because for the last 40 years, we've been taken advantage of. So 3 key areas there. The first one is protect our technology, and that's strengthening our export controls and our infrastructure. You know, that was one of the things that we did when we announced the Clean Network. They called it the 5G trifecta. That was our opening salvo against Huawei, because they had all the momentum. And for anybody in the high-tech business, you know that in a rapidly changing market like technology, everybody wants to go with the leader. And leadership is not determined by size. It's determined by momentum, because everybody wants to skate to where the puck is going to go. And so our objective was to take the momentum away from them. And so that was our opening salvo, was the 5G trifecta. And in the same day we announced the TSMC onshoring, we announced closing all the loopholes on export controls for Huawei, and we announced the Clean Network, all in that one day. Export controls is certainly key. And I think that, you know, I serve, some of you may know the CFIUS committee in the government, high-level government officials, where if a country like China or whoever wants to buy a U.S. company or buy U.S. technology, it needs to be reviewed. And there's so much stuff that slips through the cracks. And so big push is presumption of denial for countries like Iran, Russia, North Korea, Cuba, China, all those. And that streamlines the process. So I think you're going to see a lot more of that. The president's certainly in favor of that. The second big area is protect our capital. We have the most efficient capital markets in the world, and we spent a lot of time on that. One of the things that we were really trying to get done at the administration was to get the 3 most important Chinese companies, the AI military, Tencent, Alibaba, and Baidu, off the American exchanges. And that actually represented about, of all the U.S. investment, investor in, it's probably about 60% were in those 3 companies. And, you know, the average American citizen is unknowingly invested in these Chinese companies because they're buried in these pension funds that are buried in these MSCI index. So the president just put out a memorandum, and it was probably the greatest presidential memorandum I ever read that really closed the loopholes on this, because there's no sense financing these guys' initiatives. And then, of course, the third thing is protecting our intellectual property, and that's securing universities, labs, and companies. There's a company out there called Strider, and what they do is they'll go in a company and they'll audit the company. They can do it with publicly available information, They scraped the websites in China and all that, and they found 40 members of the PLA who've been in Los Alamos labs. And it's a big problem at universities. And you don't see that being reciprocal with China. So protecting the intellectual property is absolutely key. And auditing, I think, is a really important part of that. And that was one of the things we wanted to make sure when we were architecting the Chips and Science Act, is that if we're going to give money to somebody, they've got to have some good controls. The third pillar then is what we call force multipliers. And that's building a trusted AI network. So it's really an all-society effort. We can't do it alone. Bring in other nations, bring in companies, all the governments, associations, all of that to operate by those trust principles. And that's a big initiative that we started at the Krach Institute. It's called the Trusted Tech Network. It's kind of the clean network on steroids. And we want all of you guys to join that. And it's really about building that global coalition. And it's about deploying that. And that is a proven model. The other is deploy a global trusted tech standard. And that's another initiative that we've announced. And so what is that? Well, it's not down in the weeds, like looking at little algorithms or, engineering components or anything like that. It is defined as those principles that we operate by. So in other words, it is that reciprocity. It is respect for rule of law, respect for human rights, all of that. So if your company comes from a place or doesn't abide by those principles, you don't meet the global trust standard. So need not apply. And that was really effective for us with the Clean Network, because I would go to countries, I won't say which telco it was, but I'm meeting with the CEO, and he goes, "Hey, don't worry, we're not going to buy from Huawei, but I'll tell you what we're doing. We're saying," and we basically created, we call the digital trust standard. He said, we just say you got to meet the digital trust standard, and China, of course, can't meet that. And so that's a big thing. And we announced we'll be certifying first companies and technologies this year. We call it the XGTT standard, Global Trusted Tech Standard. The X stands for, put in front of it AI, put in front of it 5G, all the different key areas. The third key in terms of force multipliers, so if you're building a network, one of the things you've got to do to get the power of the network effect, which is the number of members squared, is add value to those members. And Anne, I worked with a fair amount. Her mission was also Huawei in the Biden administration. And she goes, we're just getting our butt kicked in Africa and South America. Huawei's giving this stuff away for free. And the point is, you can't win against these guys in price competition. Ericsson, Nokia, Samsung, they can't do that. So what do you have to do? You have to provide a value proposition that's beyond that. And so what is this country getting? And so one of the things that running economic diplomacy, where I had 3,000 economic officers around the world, is we needed to put tools in their hands, a toolkit, in their toolkit. So when I would meet with economic ministers, finance ministers, foreign ministers of developing nations, I'll tell you what they wanted. They wanted United States, American investment. And they wanted investment in the innovation sector. And particularly, they wanted it in their rural regions, because that's where the votes were. And they wanted to close the digital divide. So my dream was that we would put together packages of private sector technology that we could provide to people who are living on less than $3 a day for a penny a day. Well, now we've right now we're doing it. We started out in 2 countries, in Malawi and also India, because now you can get a cell phone, a smartphone for $1, and we can run these AI applications on them. And we're changing the world. It's for the retailer, the fishmonger, the farmer, et cetera. And so this is AI for good. And I think those are the really important things. Because right now, China's all over these countries, particularly in those rural regions. So I'd say this, just kind of in closing. There's a few fundamental truths in this race. And the first one is the ultimate weapon is speed. And whoever moves the fastest defines the future. And it's not the big that's going to eat the small. It's the fast that's going to eat the slow. So there is a real sense of urgency on this. Then, of course, the second key principle is the ultimate currency, is trust. And nations and businesses will align their technology around trust. I just share, in closing, just share something with you. And it was from a great mentor of mine, share the wisdom of Secretary George Shultz. And he was a great transformational leader. And just months before he passed, he wrote this. And he said, December 13th marks my turning 100 years young. I've learned much over time. And I've learned it over and over again. But looking back, I'm struck there is one lesson I learned early and relearned over. Trust is the coin of the realm. When trust was in the room, whatever room that was, the family room, the school room, the locker room, the government room, the office room, or the military room, good things happen. When trust was not in a room, good things did not happen. Everything else was details. And I think in that, there's a lot of wisdom. And that's the superpower of trust. So I'm asking each one of you, you guys are here for a reason, is to really join this cause. And because if it's not you, then who's it going to be? And if it's not now, then when? Because we really can't afford to wait. Because this really is a fight, freedom versus authoritarianism. That's the other thing I also learned coming into the government. I grew up in Ohio, white picket fence, the dog, 2.5 kids. I was 0.5 because I had 2 sisters. And, just happily living along with freedom. And what I saw is Ben Franklin was right. Democracy is a great thing if you can keep it, but you got to fight every day for it. Because the natural order of things and the law of physics is the bad king, the dictator, the emperor who's going to rule. And you got to fight every day for that. And I have so much respect for a federal government because if it wasn't for that, for what these great courageous government officials do, and I mean the foreign service officers, civil servants, all of them, not only would we not have our freedom, but there'd be about 100 other countries that didn't. And so with that, I want to thank you guys for being patient with me. The reception's coming up. And I really hope you join us. And if you guys are interested in joining the Krach Institute for Tech Diplomacy, we'd love to have you. Thank you very much. Godspeed.
And now, for brief closing remarks, please welcome Ili Bayraktari, President of the Special Competitive Studies Project.